Hello and welcome to the Garden Log. I am Ben Dark and I am a gardener. I am also the host of this podcast and your guide to the world of horticulture. This week was a windy week. My goodness, it was blowing it about out there. Not unexpected for autumn, though normally I'd expect that the big winds to come around mid-October, the end of October. So mid-September is precocious. I find a sense of worried excitement, lying in bed, listening to the air hurling itself in sheets against the house and thinking deliciously macabre thoughts about the damage that might have been done to the garden. Shall I picture whole wisterias ripped from the front of the house? Shall I envisage trees knocking each other over like dominoes? It gives one a little thrill. It's the same as imagining the worst thing that could happen in any scenario. You can't stop yourself doing it. I think the worst storm that I've had in my gardening career was those October storms in 2013 it would have been. The St. Jude's storm. And I was working at the time down at Chiswick House in the gardens team there in West London. And for those of you who don't know Chiswick House, it's a quintessential Georgian landscape left to grow wild and out of control. All of those fresh young trees put in by Kent and others now are decadent, gnarled, rotting old things. So when we came in after the storm, the damage was incredible. Great, big, mature oaks upended, ash lying everywhere. We had the trees that had almost burst. I think they call it a twisting stress fracture, where the top of the tree is caught and twisted round and the trunk almost explodes outwards. It really is fantastic to see. Coming in that morning, it was like discovering the ruins of some ancient temple. We could see that there was a garden here somewhere, but it was buried under wood. What a day. Anyway, no such excitement this week, though a lot of beech nuts did fall off the beech trees. You can hear all about that, along with the planting of a new elm tree and a horrendous bit of lawn scalping. Shameful scalping. So enough loitering around in the introduction stage. Let's get on and listen to the Week in Gardening. Welcome to the Week in Gardening. This week started with some cutting back. Not cutting back in the sense of abstaining from anything. We still have all of our addictions intact. Cutting back as in taking the secateurs and snipping things away. In this case, I was snipping away some lavender. Now this is a late flowering lavender with a very long flower stem. You will have to forgive me because I don't know exactly which cultivar it is. But it is the kind of lavender you would plant next to a path if you wanted the lavender to gracefully fall onto the path so that anyone who walked along would have lavender-smelling ankles. It would tickle the ends of their trousers, and when they came up into the house, they would smell of a nice, calming cushion. And this is all well and good. I am in favour of fragrant ankles. The problem is that I frequently drive a tractor along the path, and I also drive diggers along it. And diggers and tractors are not forgiving of poor little lavender plants. The result of this is they have become decidedly frayed, ragged, mushed and pulped. It looks like someone is halfway through making a crude fabric from them. They're pounding them to get the fibres released. So those were snipped off, along with all of the other growth that the plant has put on this year. I want to retain just a few millimetres, half a centimetre of this year's growth. I don't want to cut into the old wood because I don't think the plant will regenerate. So I just want to leave the faintest sheen of silver upon the plant, like the chin of a very old and slightly unshaven man. And like a good chin, with a lavender plant, it's nice to see the contours. And I was quite pleased. The side that has been tractor and digger abused looks ragged still, but the other side is now nicely domed. And one can appreciate the plant architecturally again. There are various lavender hedges in this part of the garden, and all of them were put in at the same time and are reaching senescence together. No matter how well you manage lavender, it is one of those tricky sub-shrubs that don't live long. Even with hard clipping back each year, the dark underskirt, the bit where there is no new growth, slowly creeps up. And I think these plants probably only have one more season, one more trip out to play with the bees before they are replaced by younger, fresher models. That's something I should note now. I should start propagating lots of lavender. I'll have to remember to take some hardwood cuttings from some of the plants in the upcoming weeks. It was a satisfying job to start a week because it leaves you with wonderfully scented hands. On Tuesday, my thoughts turned to the smaller inhabitants of the gardens, those pests and diseases I have recently been battling. I found some really good aphid infestations. I think the best aphid infestation of the summer, and that's on one of the hardy hibiscus plants. As fans of the hardy hibiscus will know, it is still in magnificent flower. It's one of the last shrubs to start doing anything in the garden. The leaves don't come out until almost May or June, and then the flowers really only start in August. And they're still pumping out the flowers. I don't particularly like the specimen in our garden. The flowers are a messy, muddy sort of mauve, which is why I'm quite happy to let the aphids have it. The aphids are all clustered around the nascent flowers, around the fat buds, which is where the plant is sending its best sap reserves. And the interesting thing is that there are two distinct types. There are green fly and black fly, each being farmed by ants, and each bud has just a monoculture. It's either all green fly or all black fly. Sometimes you can get clusters of buds, 4 or 5 of them together, each with its own little colony, either green or black, with no pattern, rhyme or reason. I guess that the ants just transport the first generation up there, and from there an empire is born, a civilization unique to each bud. In some parts of the garden, maybe on the cucumbers or on the dahlias, I would be out squishing aphids and removing them because they can transport viruses around, but particularly the mosaic virus. But I don't think anything really affects the hibiscus, and I don't really care if it does. I'd rather see the little creatures doing their damnedest to survive, so they can stay there. The other diseases seem to be under control. That outbreak of powdery mildew on one of the big dahlia beds seems to have been fought away, and I don't know if that was the milk solution or if it was a revitalized attitude towards watering. The attack of the box tree moth caterpillar is also completely under control. After a few sessions picking things off by hand and a spray with a general purpose bug killer, it seems that the threat is well and truly repelled, which is a bit of a disappointment because I thought we were in for a battle. This is a case of getting myself worked up by the hyperbolic media once again. I thought this was the final end of the box, and I was going to be in the heroic rearguard action, fighting to preserve the last hedge in Britain. Actually, it seems that the caterpillar is as vulnerable as many other caterpillars to the nimble hands of the gardener. In disease-related news, it was a big day on Tuesday because we planted a large tree, and it was an elm tree. This is the first elm that I have planted in my horticultural career to date. I know that resistant elms have been around for a couple of decades now, but there is still something of an unwillingness to risk them. And this week we did. We planted a huge specimen. It's about 4 meters tall. Dug a very big hole with the digger, mixed in some good homemade compost, got the thing in there and watered it in, and I think it's going to be a magnificent addition to the landscape. I am too young to have seen the elm in its majestic, mature tree form anywhere really in England. I see it at the hedgerow stage where it is more resistant, and I'm hoping that this tree gets to forest tree sizes, a suitable replacement for those lost giants, the trees that you see in the paintings of Constable and Forster. So that was very exciting. I went for a minimal staking approach. So when the hole was dug out by the digger, I rammed a stake into the bottom of the hole to one side so that I could slip the tree's root ball in right next to it and then tie the elm very low to the ground. This is in keeping with the current orthodoxy that to grow a nice strong stem, a tree needs to have flex and waft. It needs to dance with the air currents. What it doesn't want to do is rock around so much that the roots can't make any real contact with the ground around them. That's why there is some staking still in position. It was a very satisfying job. It's a bit of a gardening feel-good cliché, the sense of awe that comes from planting a tree that will outlive you many, many times over. But it's a cliché because it is an amazing feeling. It's quite nice to think of my tree being bathed in radio waves, in the signals from the man's first colony on Mars, being beamed back to motherland Earth around the leaves of these trees. Let's just hope it doesn't succumb to powdery mildew. Anyway, that was Tuesday. On Wednesday, I had one of those 2 steps forward, 6 giant leaps backward kind of days. I thought I'd save some time on the lawn cutting by doing a lot more of it with the ride-on mower, by switching over some of the bits that normally we do with various types of pedestrian mower into ride-on cultivation. This was pure laziness and time-saving on my behalf. I knew that soon it will become wet and we won't be able to get the ride-on mower into any of these places. And I thought, well, let's just do it now. Let's try and win back half a day from the grass-cutting gods. And the gods were angered by this slapdash approach to lawn maintenance, and this led to me scalping it horribly in some places. There are some grass ramps, and really I should have raised the blades a good 3 notches when I went over them. I completely forgot to, and tore great chunks out of it. So for those of you who don't know, scalping is the rather descriptive term given to when your lawnmower blade is too low and it cuts down through the grass into the soil below. And you can scalp a lawn with a nice sharp blade and leave just a very, very, very bare raw patch with all of the grass roots still intact. So you just need to give it some water and it'll come back again. Or you can scalp it with an incredibly blunt but very powerful ride-on mower blade, in which case you almost rip the grass out in chunks, which is what I have done. So that meant in the quest for extra time, I had to get off the mower, put it away, go and make a top dressing mix. A mix of very good quality topsoil with a little bit of extremely well filtered compost, and then go and spread that on the area to fill in the gouges, the great holes in the earth where the grass had been torn out by its roots. Then I had to roll all of that down, sprinkle fresh grass seed over the whole top, water it in, and then I was worried, very worried, about how quickly the seed would germinate. So then I got a tarpaulin and I covered the area of the grass and weighed it down with stones. And I had to weigh it down with stones because if any of you are listening in the UK and can remember as far back as last week, it was incredibly windy. We got the first of those wonderful autumn storms buffeting against our island. There were apples coming down like hailstorms. There were all sorts of logs flying through the air, bits of dead tree dropping themselves out onto the grounds below. At one stage, I was sitting in the break hut having a cup of tea, and I thought that I could hear gusts of wind and all of the tiles on the roof lifting and being dropped back down onto the roof again with this strange porcelainy chinking noise. I went outside and tried to see the tiles moving and realised that it was just dense swarms of the casing around beech nuts being blasted into the building almost sideways. Anyway, that's what I had to deal with when laying out this tarpaulin. It's a wonder I wasn't blown off over the house and into the North Sea. So don't rush your gardening. This is what I'm going to tell people in the future when I'm chivied along. You can't rush. You end up spending more time on a thing. Just calm, cool, and collected. Hopefully that seed will germinate under its tarpaulin hat. I will, of course, keep you updated. Thursday was just as blowy. We lost no big trees themselves, but a couple of branches fell down. Some of the more extravagant dahlias gave up holding their blooms aloft, and who can really blame them? I did a little wander around the garden to see how things were progressing in this summer-autumn mixture we find ourselves in. I was very pleased to see a lot of flower spikes on the nerine pot. You may remember earlier in the year I planted a very big pot and I crammed it full of nerine bodenii. And finally this pot are sending up those wonderfully elegant snake's head buds. They have just reached the height of the leaves and soon they will soar above it. It's amazing how quickly bulb stems develop. And I'm very pleased with this, not just because I love the plant. It's wonderful to have a ruffled pink exploding trombone firework in the garden, but also because some people who are unfamiliar with the wonders of nerine have been ribbing me for my pride I've been taking in this big pot of leaves. They've been asking me, well, how are your leaves this week? And now I will be able to show them. Because it is important to remember that gardening is not just about the connection with nature. It's also about scoring small victories over your fellow man. Talk to anyone who has entered a vegetable show and they can tell you that. The most exciting news in my wander around the garden looking at plants, talking this, I was speaking to my brother who has done a little tiny bit of work for me once and said that it was great because you got to wander around the garden looking at plants. It is my favourite hobby, and once more I did go and look at the plants and I found that the Schizophragma integrifolium is now clinging. This is Schizophragma integrifolium windmills, the one that I planted to cover up these rather ugly larch trees. Well, the stems have been waving themselves around for a while now, and a few of them had made contact with the larch tree, and I've been monitoring them to see how they progressed from there. And what they've done is they've pressed themselves up really tightly, like a very clingy lover might do to someone who's going off on a train journey to a new country. They just pressed against them, never want to let them go. And now I try to very gently tease them apart and realize that the roots have grown from the schizophragma now and have suckered themselves onto this larch tree. So that made me very, very pleased. And in a mere decade or so, the tree will have disappeared under the elegant white flowers of the schizophragma. It's amazing the growth that it has put on, this little plant. I think the ones that are growing away from the larch tree, I'm going to whip off and see if I can get to root in a potting mix, because I think it is my favourite plant of the year. I really feel a personal connection to it somehow. Goodness knows why. So that was Thursday. On Friday I went back to actual work and I did some compost tending. I made a new addition to the heap, a pine needle addition. And the subject of pine needles on the compost heap is somewhat controversial. Pine needles, for those of you who haven't tried to rot them down at home, are very waxy. They're hard for little microbes to break into. And they're also very acidic. I think some of them are about 3.5 pH, which is really quite acidic. So people are scared of them. They think that it's going to vastly affect the pH of their heap, and not only the breakdown of the needles themselves, but the rest of the organic matter. I am not worried about this. I have no fears. I think that might be the case on a small heap, but we have a very hungry compost heap. I heard Christine Walton talking on Gardener's Question Time a few years ago about her compost heap, and she was saying that she goes out into her road and just sweeps up windfall pine needles wherever she can get them and puts them on her heap, because her heap is hungry, it will consume them. Ours is just as hungry. The pine needles might take a little bit of time to break down, but it's so hot in there, it's steaming so much that I really don't think they will. And I picked them up with a lawnmower, so they are slightly chopped up already. And even if they don't break down straight away, that might be a help, because they have a different texture to them. They have the ability to open up the heap a little bit, to stop it turning into one great, big, claggy pie. I should say that when I put a few in, I put in 3 full-sized wheelie bins of pine needles, which I think is about 720 litres, though I couldn't actually shut the lid on the wheelie bins. They were all too full. So maybe let's call it 750 litres of pine needle. I'm very excited about this because I have become something of a connoisseur of the scent of the compost heap, the steam that comes when I turn it with a digger each morning, and what new smells are going to come out. And I think this pine could be a really quite sophisticated addition to the compost aroma. I will keep you updated on that as well. And with that session on the compost heap, it was the end of another week. The garden seems to have survived the wind. I survived the wind. Sometimes some of my cycling was a little bit hairy when a gust completely broadsides you and you go, whoo. You know, it's good for airflow. And at this time of year, good healthy circulation is very important. Right, enough of that. Let's go and see if we have any horticultural recommendations this week. My recommendation for this week is another gardening podcast. This is a very, very good gardening podcast. Most gardening podcasts are good, of course, but this one is particularly good. It's called Gardens, Weeds and Words, and the presenter and creator, producer, Andrew, has been taking an awful lot of time and care over the thing. It's a product of love and thought and careful consideration. It's sort of an interview format, sort of a magazine format. There are guests, there are readings, there's a reading from me, and there are little recordings of sounds from the garden. The sound of cutting a hedge with a pair of well-oiled and well-sharpened shears. I don't know if anyone has noticed this, but I like the way the whole recording ends with a little snip of the secateurs, a sound so distinctive and evocative to the gardener that is almost Proustian. You can see yourself with a rose in front of you going snip, snip as soon as you hear it. And that's the kind of attention to detail that pervades this production. So go to Gardens, Weeds and Words. You really, really will enjoy this show. It was my birthday during the week. Happy birthday to me. And I got some good gardening books. One was a present from myself and one was a present from my in-laws, both of which will feature in the forthcoming weeks. But I won't bother with them now. I'll just focus on Andrew and his wonderful new podcast. I thank you very much for listening. Sorry there was a delay in the release of this. I got some sort of bug, and it was good. It was good for recording in the sense that it dropped my voice considerably. So for a few days back then, I was really gravelly and gruff and deep and rough. But every third word I would have to sniff back the contents of my nose, which wasn't great on tape. So I decided to put back the recording, and you are listening now to a revitalized and reinvigorated gardening host. Anyway, I hope that you have a wonderful week, whether you are gardening or not. I'm planning some very big things for next week, but it depends rather on a couple of key deliveries that still haven't arrived. So that's probably as close as we can come to a cliffhanger on the garden log. Thank you and goodbye.